History holds secrets where the trail simply ends. We are about to explore 25 of the most baffling historical disappearances, cases that have left investigators and historians utterly confounded for decades, even centuries. This is not just a list of cold cases. These are profound puzzles that challenge everything we think we know about the past, about geography, and about human nature itself. By the end, you will understand the strange forces that can erase entire communities and legendary figures from the map. We will journey to a colony that vanished, leaving only a single word carved in wood, and to a ship found sailing itself with the crew gone without a reason. What is it about a story with no ending that captures our imagination so completely? Our journey begins in the late 16th century, on a windswept island off the coast of what is now North Carolina. In 1587, a group of about 115 English men, women, and children established a settlement on Roanoke Island. It was meant to be England's first permanent foothold in the New World, a beacon of colonial ambition. Among them was Governor John White and his family, including his newborn granddaughter, Virginia Dare, the first English child born in the Americas. Soon after the colony was established, supplies ran dangerously low. John White, reluctantly, sailed back to England to secure more provisions, leaving his family and the entire settlement behind. He expected to return within months. But war between England and Spain delayed him, and 3 long years passed before he could finally sail back to Roanoke. What he found upon his return in 1590 was nothing short of a nightmare. The settlement was utterly deserted. The houses had been carefully dismantled, not destroyed, suggesting a planned departure rather than a sudden attack. Every single person was gone. His family, his friends, little Virginia Dare, all vanished without a trace. The only clues were cryptic carvings on 2 trees. On one post, the word Croatoan was carved in capital letters. On another tree, just the letters CRO. There was no cross. The prearranged distress signal White had instructed them to leave if they were in danger. It was as if the entire community had simply been swallowed by the wilderness. This single word, Croatoan, has fueled centuries of speculation. It likely referred to Croatoan Island, now known as Hatteras Island, home to a Native American tribe of the same name who were known to be friendly to the English. The leading theory, therefore, is one of assimilation. Facing starvation and isolation, the colonists may have split into smaller groups and integrated with the Croatan people or other nearby tribes. Later reports from other English explorers mention sightings of gray-eyed Native Americans or those who spoke English and lived in European-style houses, tantalizing hint that some colonists may have survived. Other theories are far darker. Perhaps a rival tribe launched a devastating attack, or a severe drought and famine forced a desperate, failed relocation inland. Spanish ships patrolling the coast could have captured them, yet no graves, no battle debris, no clear evidence of violence has ever been conclusively found. Modern archaeology continues to search for answers, examining soil layers and analyzing artifacts from the region. Some intriguing finds, like a piece of slate that might be a writing tablet and English pottery fragments found miles inland, offer glimmers of hope. But the full story remains buried. The lost colony of Roanoke endures not just as America's oldest cold case, but as a profound human mystery. It is the story of a community that stepped off the edge of the known world and into the realm of legend, leaving behind only a single, haunting word as their farewell. The eerie silence of an empty settlement gives way to the profound quiet of an empty sea. Decades after Roanoke, another kind of vanishing would capture the world's imagination, one that took place not on land, but in the vast, open Atlantic. In December 1872, a British merchant ship named the Dei Gratia spotted another vessel, the American brigantine Mary Celeste, drifting aimlessly about 400 miles off the coast of Portugal. The ship was under full sail, yet her movements were strange and listless. After hailing her and receiving no reply, Captain David Morehouse sent a boarding party over. What they discovered was a scene of perfect, unsettling normalcy frozen in time. The Mary Celeste was perfectly seaworthy, with no significant damage and her cargo of industrial alcohol still securely stored. Yet not a single soul was on board. The crew of 10, Captain Benjamin Briggs, his wife Sarah, and their 2-year-old daughter Sophia, had vanished without a trace. In the captain's cabin, a half-eaten meal sat on the table, as if someone had just stepped away. The crew's personal belongings, including their pipes and tobacco, were neatly stowed. The ship's logbook was intact, its last entry dated 10 days earlier, noting nothing more alarming than rough weather. But one lifeboat was missing. This was not a case of a ship being torn apart by a storm. This was a vessel abandoned in calm seas, by a crew that left behind everything they owned. The popular myth, fueled by sensational fiction, suggests the cargo of alcohol exploded, frightening the crew into fleeing. Yet there was no evidence of fire or explosion, and the cargo barrels were found sealed. Other theories propose a sudden, violent natural event. A waterspout, a tornado over water, might have struck, causing the crew to believe the ship was taking on water faster than she was. A seaquake, an underwater earthquake, could have produced a loud, terrifying noise and a shockwave, convincing everyone the hull was about to split. In a moment of collective panic, they may have hastily launched the single lifeboat, only to watch helplessly as the perfectly sound Mary Celeste sailed on without them, their fragile boat then lost to the waves. The possibility of piracy was considered, but it made little sense. Why would pirates take the people but leave a valuable ship and its entire cargo untouched? No signs of violence or struggle were ever found. The Mary Celeste was recovered, but her story was just beginning. She became the archetype of the ghost ship, a perfect machine sailing on without its human heart, her decks forever echoing with the ghost of a half-finished breakfast, and the unanswered question of what could frighten an experienced captain and his family into leaving the safety of their ship for the deadly uncertainty of the open ocean. The silent horror of an abandoned ship finds its echo in the frozen, crushing grip of the Arctic ice. While the Mary Celeste was a mystery of a single moment, our next disappearance is a slow, unfolding tragedy of ambition against an unforgiving landscape. In May 1845, two of the British Royal Navy's most robust ships, HMS Erebus and HMS Terror, sailed from England with 129 officers and crew. They were led by the experienced Sir John Franklin, and their mission was one of the era's great quests, to finally chart and conquer the elusive Northwest Passage, a sea route across the top of North America. The ships were state-of-the-art, fitted with steam engines, reinforced hulls, and libraries stocked with over 1,000 books. They carried provisions for 3 years. The world expected a triumph. Instead, the entire expedition vanished into the white silence of the Canadian Arctic. What followed was the largest search operation of the 19th century. Over 40 expeditions scoured the frozen archipelago over decades, driven partly by hope and partly by the substantial reward offered by Franklin's wife, Lady Jane Franklin. The clues they eventually found were sparse and chilling. Inuit hunters told stories of seeing groups of gaunt, starving white men dragging boats across the ice, and of finding camps with bodies. European search parties discovered skeletons on the bleak King William Island, some showing knife marks on the bones, a grim suggestion of cannibalism as a last resort against starvation. Most telling was a single sheet of paper found in a stone cairn in 1859. It contained 2 messages. The first, dated May 1847, stated all was well. The second, scribbled in the margins a year later, told a desperate tale. The ships had been trapped in ice for over a year. Sir John Franklin had died. The remaining men had abandoned the vessels to try and walk to safety. The note ended with the haunting phrase, "And start on tomorrow, 26th, for Back's Fish River." None of them would make it. For over a century and a half, the final resting places of Erebus and Terror remained one of the Arctic's great secrets. Then, in a stunning modern breakthrough, using Inuit oral history as a guide, sonar technology located the wreck of HMS Erebus in 2014. 2 years later, HMS Terror was found, sitting upright and remarkably preserved on the seafloor. These discoveries, coupled with forensic analysis of the few recovered remains, have pieced together a probable catastrophe. The men were likely suffering from multiple, cascading failures. Their tinned food, a cutting-edge technology, was sealed with lead solder. Analysis of bones shows catastrophic lead poisoning, which causes severe fatigue, confusion, and abdominal pain, crippling their ability to make sound decisions. They also faced brutal cold, starvation as their supplies ran out, and scurvy from a lack of fresh food. It was a perfect storm of 19th century hubris. They had the finest equipment of their age, but it was fatally flawed, and they were utterly unprepared for the relentless, indifferent power of the Arctic. Their disappearance was not a sudden vanishing, but a slow, agonizing unraveling, a testament to the terrible price of exploration when nature refuses to yield. While the Arctic's cold is a known and brutal enemy, sometimes the most chilling disappearances happen in places meant to be shelters, beacons of safety in the wilderness. On a cluster of 7 tiny, jagged islands 20 miles west of Scotland's Outer Hebrides, the Flannan Isles Lighthouse stood as a sentinel against the violent North Atlantic. In December 1900, it became the stage for a small, perfect mystery. The lighthouse was manned by a rotating crew of 3 experienced keepers. On December 15th, a passing ship noted the light was out, an alarming sign. Due to rough seas, a relief vessel couldn't reach the isolated rock of Eilean Moor until December 26th. What the landing party found was a scene of profound and unsettling stillness. The lighthouse gate and main door were closed. Inside, the lamps were cleaned and refilled, ready for lighting. 2 of the 3 oilskin coats were missing, but time itself seemed to have stopped. A chair lay toppled on its side. In the kitchen, a meal of boiled eggs and stew remained uneaten on the table. One of the keepers' beds was unmade. Most eerily, the clock on the wall had stopped, its hands frozen. The 3 men, James Jucat, Thomas Marshall, and the occasional keeper Donald MacArthur, were gone without a trace. The only potential clues were in the lighthouse log. Entries, reportedly written by Thomas Marshall, described days of the worst weather he had ever seen, with winds so fierce the keepers were praying. The final log entry, dated December 15th, simply stated, "Storm ended, sea calm. God is over all." Yet official weather records from nearby stations showed no such extreme storms on those dates. This contradiction only deepened the puzzle. The leading theory is as simple as it is tragic. The rules required one keeper to always remain inside. Perhaps one man was outside on the western landing platform, checking equipment or securing supplies, when a freak colossal wave, a rogue wall of water common in those seas, swept him away. The second keeper, witnessing this, rushed out in a desperate attempt to help, only to be taken by the next wave. The third, bound by duty to stay at his post, would have faced an impossible choice, likely choosing to attempt a rescue and meeting the same fate. This would explain the missing oilskins and the overturned chair, a sign of a sudden, frantic movement. Other suggestions point to human psychology in extreme isolation. Could one keeper have suffered a sudden mental break, leading to a violent confrontation that ended with all 3 in the sea? The untouched meal and the stopped clock suggest an interruption so abrupt they intended to return in moments. The islands themselves are steeped in old Celtic folklore, spoken of as a place of spirits and the little people, which fueled supernatural speculation for years. But the truth likely lies in the brutal, indifferent mechanics of the ocean. The Flannan Isles mystery endures because it is a snapshot of interrupted domesticity, a single moment where routine was shattered, leaving behind a cold pot of stew, an unmade bed, and a silent clock, forever marking the instant 3 men stepped out of their door and vanished from the face of the earth. From the isolated rocks of the North Atlantic, we travel back through centuries to the very edge of the Roman Empire, where another group of men vanished into the mist, this time not a handful of keepers, but an entire army. The story of the 9th Legion, Legio Roman 9 Hispana, is one of Rome's most enduring military mysteries. For centuries, this formidable unit, over 5,000 trained soldiers strong, was a cornerstone of Roman power in the province of Britannia. They built fortresses, crushed rebellions, and pushed the frontier northward. Then, sometime after the year 108, they simply ceased to appear in the surviving records. The Legion, its proud eagle standards, its centurions, its cavalry, and its foot soldiers, seems to have been erased from history. The most dramatic and popular theory, immortalized in books and films, is a tale of epic annihilation. It suggests the Ninth marched north from their fortress at York into the wild highlands of Caledonia, modern Scotland, to subdue the fierce Pictish tribes. According to this story, they were lured into treacherous terrain, perhaps a dense forest or a narrow glen, and ambushed. In a single, catastrophic battle, the entire legion was wiped out to the last man, their bodies left to the elements and their sacred eagle standards captured. A humiliation so complete Rome chose to bury the record of the defeat. It is a powerful image, the might of Rome swallowed whole by the barbarian wilderness. But history is rarely so neat. While the legion's disappearance from Britain is certain, its outright destruction is far from proven. There are tantalizing, fragmentary hints that the Ninth might have survived beyond Britain. A stray inscription from the Netherlands, dated possibly to the early 2nd century, mentions the legion. Some scholars argue it could have been transferred to the Rhine frontier to fight in other campaigns, perhaps suffering such heavy losses there that it was ultimately disbanded, and its remaining men folded into other units, its identity quietly retired. Another possibility is that the legion met a different, quieter end. If it was badly mauled in a conflict, whether in Britain or elsewhere, and its ranks depleted below usefulness, it might have been formally dissolved. The Romans were pragmatic. A legion was a massive investment, and they would not have sent a crippled one into a final, suicidal battle for the sake of drama. They would have retired its number and reassigned the veterans. So the question remains, was the Ninth Hispana the victim of a single, thunderous disaster, a historical trauma so deep Rome tried to forget it, or was its fate more bureaucratic, a slow fading away through transfers, reassignments, and administrative erasure? The soil of northern Britain has yet to yield a mass grave of Roman legionaries that could solve the puzzle. So the legion stands frozen in our imagination, 5,000 men in gleaming armor marching in perfect formation into a bank of highland fog, and never marching out again. A ghost army forever lost between the pages of history and the power of legend. The ghostly silence of a vanished legion is a mystery measured in centuries, but some disappearances strike with a terrible intimacy, leaving a raw and personal wound that never heals. On Christmas Eve, 1945, in the small town of Fayetteville, West Virginia, a family's quiet celebration turned into an unending nightmare. George and Jenny Sauter and 9 of their 10 children went to bed in their 2-story home. Just after midnight, a fire erupted. In the chaos, George, Jenny, and 4 of the children managed to escape, scrambling out of windows and doors. But 5 of their children, Morris, Martha, Louie, Jenny, and Betty, aged 5 to 14, were trapped on the 2nd floor. George raced to get his truck to use as a platform to reach them, but the ladder that always leaned against the house was gone. He tried to drive the truck closer, but it wouldn't start. He ran to call the fire department, but the phone line was dead, cut. By the time a neighbor's alarm brought help, the house was a roaring inferno. By morning, it was a smoldering ruin. The official conclusion was tragically simple. The 5 children had perished in the blaze. But for the Sauters, the facts refused to add up. The fire had burned with a ferocious, unnatural heat, consuming the house in under an hour, yet leaving surrounding trees untouched. Most baffling of all, when authorities sifted the ashes, they found no bones, no dental remains, nothing of the 5 children. A human body does not simply vaporize in a house fire. The county coroner produced a few bits of charred material, claiming they were human organs, but a state police officer later admitted they were merely animal remains. The family's grief curdled into a conviction. This was not an accident, but a kidnapping. George Sauter, an immigrant from Italy, was outspoken in his criticism of Mussolini and fascism. He had received threats. He believed someone had set the fire to cover the abduction of his children. The strange details piled up. A witness reported seeing a man lurking near the house that night, and another claimed to have seen the missing children in a car shortly after the fire. A mysterious woman later called the Sauters, saying, "Your children are safe," before hanging up. For the rest of their lives, George and Jenny Sauter turned their property into a shrine and a command post, erecting a billboard with the children's pictures and ages, pleading for information. They hired private investigators, followed leads across the country, and never gave up hope. The case remains officially unsolved, a haunting puzzle of a fire that burned too hot, a ladder that walked away, and 5 young lives that disappeared from a second-floor bedroom without leaving a single trace behind. A family's love forever pitted against a void of unanswered questions. The lingering pain of a single family's loss expands into the grandest, most enduring disappearance story of them all, one that has haunted humanity for millennia. We move now from the realm of documented history into the shadowy borderland of myth and memory, to the story of Atlantis. This is not a mystery of a missing person or a ship, but of an entire civilization, a sophisticated island empire said to have vanished beneath the waves in a cataclysm of almost biblical proportions. Our sole written source for Atlantis comes from the ancient Greek philosopher Plato, who described it in 2 of his dialogues, Timaeus and Critias, written around 360 B. See, he presents the tale not as his own invention, but as a story passed down from an Egyptian priest to the Athenian lawgiver Solon. According to Plato, Atlantis was a vast, powerful island kingdom located beyond the Pillars of Hercules, what we now call the Strait of Gibraltar, placing it in the Atlantic Ocean. Its people were advanced, wealthy, and initially virtuous, but they grew arrogant and corrupt. As punishment from the gods, the entire island was swallowed by the sea in one terrible day and night of earthquakes and floods, sinking forever into the abyss. The sheer scale of the story has ignited endless speculation. If it was real, where could it have been? One compelling candidate lies in the Mediterranean. The island of Santorini, known in ancient times as Thura, was once the center of the sophisticated Minoan civilization. Around 1600 B.C., a volcanic eruption of staggering force, one of the largest in human history, tore the island apart, creating a massive caldera and triggering tsunamis that likely devastated Minoan settlements on Crete. Could the memory of this real-world disaster, which would have felt like the end of the world to surrounding cultures, have been the seed that grew into the legend of a sunken empire? Other theories look to the Atlantic itself, suggesting locations like the Azores archipelago, or even linking the story to the rich, mysterious Bronze Age culture of Tartessos in southern Spain, which also vanished from history. But here lies the central debate. Is Atlantis a historical puzzle, or is it something else entirely? Many scholars argue persuasively that Plato was not a historian, but a philosopher. He used the story of Atlantis as a moral and political allegory, a cautionary tale about the dangers of imperial pride and moral decay. His detailed description of the island's concentric rings and magnificent architecture served to illustrate the perfect, orderly society that hubris could destroy. In this reading, Atlantis was never meant to be found on a map. It was a powerful metaphor that sank into our collective consciousness. Yet, the possibility of a real event behind the myth is tantalizing. Catastrophes like the Thura eruption are etched into cultural memory. Stories get distorted over centuries, locations shift, and details become magnified. A devastating local flood could become, over generations of storytelling, the sinking of a continent, so we are left with a beautiful duality. Atlantis is both a profound philosophical lesson about the fall of civilizations and a ghostly echo of a real trauma from our deep past. It is the ultimate disappearance because it lives in that space between what we can prove and what we feel must be true. A lost world that continues to beckon from the depths of both the ocean and our imagination. The vast, mythical loss of Atlantis stands in stark contrast to a disappearance that is chillingly small, personal, and etched into the stone of a very real fortress. In the turbulent spring of 1483, the fate of 2 young boys would alter the course of English history and spawn a mystery that has fascinated people for over 500 years. King Edward IV of England died unexpectedly, leaving the throne to his 12-year-old son, Edward V. The boy king and his 9-year-old brother, Richard, Duke of York, were placed in the Tower of London by their uncle and protector, Richard, Duke of Gloucester. This was not initially a prison sentence. The tower was a royal residence as well as a fortress, and it was standard procedure for monarchs to lodge there before their coronation. The boys were seen playing in the garden, their lessons continued, but then the political atmosphere curdled. Their uncle declared the marriage of their parents invalid, rendering the princes illegitimate and therefore ineligible for the throne. Parliament confirmed this, and Richard, Duke of Gloucester, was crowned King Richard III. After his coronation, the two princes were moved to the inner apartments of the tower. They were seen less and less, and then, by the end of that summer, they were seen no more. They simply vanished from public view and from the historical record. The assumption, quickly spreading across England, was grim and unanimous. The boys had been murdered to secure their uncle's stolen crown. Suspicion fell directly on Richard III. He had the motive, the opportunity, and the boys were in his custody. The Tudor historians who later wrote the narrative of this period painted him as a monstrous hunchback who would stop at nothing for power. But history is written by the victors, and Richard was defeated and killed just 2 years later by Henry Tudor, who became King Henry VII. This presents another compelling suspect. Henry, having taken the throne by conquest, married the prince's older sister to strengthen his claim. But the boys, if they were still alive, presented a far more direct and dangerous threat to his legitimacy than Richard ever did. Their existence would have been a constant rallying point for rebellion. Did Henry VII, upon taking the tower, find the boys alive and then quietly dispose of them? Or did he merely benefit from a crime already committed? The physical evidence is as haunting as it is inconclusive. In 1674, during renovations to the tower, workers discovered a wooden chest buried beneath a staircase in the White Tower. Inside were the skeletons of 2 children, roughly the right ages. King Charles II had these bones placed in an urn in Westminster Abbey, where they remain. Modern examinations have been limited, but they suggest the children were related and of high status. While it is tempting to see this as proof, we cannot say for certain these are the lost princes. The mystery of their fate became a powerful political tool. For the Tudor dynasty that followed, the story of the innocent princes murdered by the wicked Uncle Richard was essential propaganda. It legitimized their rule as a moral correction, a divine punishment for a terrible crime. This Tudor myth solidified Richard's villainous reputation for centuries, most famously in Shakespeare's brilliant, brutal play. But the lack of definitive proof has allowed other theories to flourish. Could the boys have died of natural causes, perhaps an illness, and their deaths were covered up to avoid suspicion? Could a third party, like the powerful Duke of Buckingham, have acted without Richard's direct order? Or, in the most romantic version, were they secretly smuggled to safety, with pretenders to the throne later claiming to be one of the lost boys? We may never know. The disappearance of the princes in the tower is more than a cold case. It is a foundational ghost story of England, a tale of power, ambition, and the terrifying vulnerability of children caught in the gears of history. Their silent fate helped forge a national narrative and left a question mark that hangs in the dusty air of the tower to this day. The vulnerability of children lost to history finds a stark contrast in the deliberate, daring ambition of a modern pioneer. Amelia Earhart was not someone who could quietly vanish. She was a global celebrity, a symbol of courage and possibility, her every move tracked by newspapers and radio. In 1937, she set out on her greatest challenge, to fly around the world at its equator, a feat never before accomplished by a pilot, man or woman. With her experienced navigator, Fred Noonan, she piloted a twin-engine Lockheed Electra. For over a month, they hopscotched across continents, from Oakland to Brazil, Africa to India, Southeast Asia to Lee, New Guinea. On July 2nd, they took off from Lee for the most perilous leg, a 2,500-mile overwater flight to a tiny speck of land in the Central Pacific called Howland Island. The U.S. Coast Guard cutter Itasca was stationed near Howland, tasked with guiding them in via radio. The communications that followed are a chronicle of mounting tension. Earhart's voice crackled over the airwaves, reporting overcast skies and headwinds. She asked the Itasca to take a bearing on her signal, but a critical problem emerged. She was broadcasting on a frequency the Itasca could hear, but she could not receive their replies. They were essentially shouting into a void. In her last, clear transmission, her voice tense but calm, she stated, "We are on the line of position 157-337. We are running north and south. We must be on you but cannot see you, and gas is running low." Static followed, then silence. They had missed the island. A massive, 16-day search covering 250,000 square miles of ocean by ships and aircraft found nothing. No wreckage, no oil slick, no trace of the Electra or its crew. The official conclusion was a crash and sinking after fuel exhaustion, the plane plunging into the vast, deep waters. Yet the absence of proof left the door open for other possibilities. One compelling alternative centers on Gardner Island, now called Nikimaroro, an uninhabited atoll about 350 miles southeast of Howland. Radio operators reported hearing faint, post-loss distress calls bearing from that direction. Years later, colonists found artifacts on the island, a sextant box of a type used by the U.S. Navy in the 1930s, a woman's compact, and pieces of aluminum aircraft debris. Most intriguingly, in 1940, a British official discovered a partial skeleton, along with a woman's shoe and a navigator's sextant, near a makeshift camp. The bones were sent for analysis, but were later lost. Modern analysis of the measurements suggests they were likely those of a tall woman of European descent, matching Earhart. The theory posits that Earhart and Noonan, lost and low on fuel, spotted the flat reef of Gardner Island, managed a crash landing, and survived for a time as castaways. Then there is the more sensational myth that they were captured by the Japanese. This theory suggests they strayed into Japanese-mandated islands, were taken as spies, and either executed or died in captivity. While persistent in popular culture, this idea is largely dismissed by historians, lacking any credible evidence from declassified files. The truth is, the Pacific is unimaginably vast and deep. Modern expeditions, armed with advanced sonar and deep-sea robots, continue to search both the ocean floor near Howland and the lagoon and reefs of Nikimaroro, driven by the hope of finding the aircraft's unmistakable wreckage. Amelia Earhart's disappearance endures because it represents the collision of soaring human achievement with the planet's most immense and indifferent geography. She did not fade from a castle or a colony, she vanished from the sky itself, leaving behind a static hiss and a question that hangs over the endless blue. While the sky swallowed Amelia Earhart, the desert holds its own secrets, capable of consuming armies. In 524 B.C., according to the ancient Greek historian Herodotus, the Persian king Cambyses II committed an act of devastating hubris. Enraged that the priests of the Oracle of Ammon at the remote Siwa oasis in Egypt refused to legitimize his rule, he dispatched a massive army of 50,000 men from the city of Thebes. Their orders were to march across the Libyan desert, destroy the sacred temple, and erase the oracle from the earth. It was a logistical nightmare, a journey of hundreds of miles through one of the most barren landscapes on the planet. Herodotus, writing decades later, recounts their fate with dramatic flair. After days of arduous travel, the army was caught in a fearsome Khamsin, a scorching windstorm that lifts the desert floor itself into the air. A colossal sandstorm rose, he writes, and buried them without a trace. 50,000 soldiers, their horses, their equipment, everything, was simply swallowed by the dunes as if they had never existed. It is a staggering image, an entire military force vanishing into a wall of moving sand. For centuries, this story was relegated to the realm of legend, a dramatic parable about the folly of defying the gods and the irresistible power of nature. Could such a vast force truly disappear without leaving a single artifact, a single piece of evidence behind? Modern archaeologists and geologists have taken the question seriously, launching expeditions into Egypt's western desert to search for the lost army. The challenge is immense. The desert is a dynamic, shifting entity. Dunes can move miles over decades, and what was once a surface can be buried under 30 feet of sand. Yet, there have been tantalizing finds. In the 1990s, a team led by archaeologists uncovered what appeared to be a mass grave site near the Siwa oasis, containing hundreds of bleached bones and ancient Persian weapon fragments, including a bronze dagger and arrowheads. Another expedition claimed to find remnants of a textile, possibly from a military tunic, and metal pieces that could be from helmets or shields. More recently, researchers using ground-penetrating radar and satellite imagery have identified what look like ancient wells and campsites along a plausible route from Thebes to Siwa, suggesting a large, organized group did attempt this crossing. So, does this prove Herodotus right? The debate is fierce. Skeptics argue that Herodotus, often called the father of history, was also the father of tall tales. He collected stories from travelers and priests, and his work blends fact with moral fable. The number 50,000 is likely a vast exaggeration, a symbolic figure representing an overwhelming force. A smaller contingent, perhaps a few thousand men, could have met a disastrous end. They might have gotten hopelessly lost, their water supplies exhausted, falling victim to dehydration and exposure rather than a single, cinematic sandstorm. Their remains would have been scattered by scavengers and buried by the relentless wind, creating the illusion of a complete vanishing. The discovery of some Persian-era artifacts in the desert doesn't conclusively point to Cambyses' army. It could indicate trade routes, smaller military patrols, or even a different, unrecorded disaster. The true fate of the army may lie somewhere between history and myth. Herodotus might have taken a kernel of truth, a real military catastrophe in the desert where many Persians died, and amplified it into a divine punishment narrative that resonated with his Greek audience, who saw the Persians as arrogant invaders. The story endures because it speaks to a universal fear, the terror of being erased by the landscape itself, of a force so immense it can blot out the sun, and then the memory of 50,000 men, leaving only the whisper of the wind over endless, empty sand. The desert's consuming silence is mirrored by the open ocean's ability to erase not just individuals, but entire squadrons from the sky. On a perfectly ordinary afternoon in December 1945, 5 United States Navy TBM Avenger torpedo bombers took off from the Naval Air Station in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. It was a routine training flight, designated Flight 19. The mission was straightforward, a 3-hour navigation and bombing run over a set of shoals east of the coast. The 5 aircraft were piloted by experienced flight instructors and student aviators, 14 men in total, led by a seasoned combat veteran, Lieutenant Charles Taylor. The weather was clear, the seas were calm. Everything was, by all accounts, perfectly normal. Then it wasn't. About an hour and a half into the flight, a confused radio transmission crackled to the control tower. Lieutenant Taylor reported his compasses were malfunctioning. He was unsure of his position. He believed he was over the Florida Keys, far to the southwest of where he should have been. The flight controllers tried to guide him, but Taylor's confidence was crumbling. His transmissions grew more frantic. "I don't know where we are," he said. "We must have gotten lost after that last turn. The sun looked strange," he noted, and the ocean below didn't look right. The other pilots could be heard arguing with him about their heading, but Taylor, as flight leader, insisted they continue east, convinced they were over the Gulf of Mexico and needed to fly east to hit Florida. In reality, if he was where he thought he was, this would have taken them deeper into the empty Atlantic. As dusk fell, the radio transmissions became ghostly, broken by static. "We can't be sure of any direction," Taylor said. "Everything is wrong. Strange. We can't be sure of any direction. Even the ocean doesn't look as it should." The last words heard from Flight 19 were faint and desperate. "All planes close up tight. We'll have to ditch unless landfall. When the first engine cuts down on fuel, we'll all go down together." Then, silence. A massive land and sea search was launched immediately. That night, a PBM Mariner flying boat, a rescue plane with 13 crewmen aboard, took off to join the hunt. 23 minutes after its last radio check, it vanished, too. Witnesses on a ship below reported seeing a huge flash of light and a fireball in the sky where the Mariner should have been. Not a single trace of the 6 aircraft or the 27 men was ever found. The official Navy investigation concluded the disaster was caused by pilot error, specifically Lieutenant Taylor's navigational confusion. He had, in fact, mistakenly believed he was over the Keys. When his compasses appeared to fail, he dismissed the readings from his more junior pilots and made a fatal decision, leading his squadron out over the open ocean until they ran out of fuel. The loss of the PBM Mariner was attributed to a common hazard for that aircraft, an explosive fuel vapor leak that could be ignited by a single spark. Yet, the sheer totality of the disappearance, the strange radio reports, and the loss of a rescue plane in such a dramatic fashion proved irresistible to the public imagination. This single incident became the foundational stone of the Bermuda Triangle legend. People wondered, could there be something more? Theories blossomed about strange magnetic anomalies that rendered compasses useless, about sudden, catastrophic weather phenomena like microbursts, or even about mysterious forces that pulled planes from the sky. In the decades that followed, the story of Flight 19 was often stripped of its human tragedy and wrapped in layers of supernatural speculation, from time warps to alien abduction. The truth is likely more human and more tragic. It is a story of a veteran pilot, possibly fatigued or suffering from spatial disorientation, a terrifying condition where a flyer can no longer trust his own senses. In the vast, featureless expanse of sea and sky, with no visual landmarks, that disorientation can be fatal. Combined with faulty equipment or a simple, initial misjudgment, it can lead a group of men, step by logical step, into a void from which there is no return. Flight 19 endures not because it defies explanation, but because it presents the ultimate aviation nightmare, a group of highly trained men, incapable aircraft, on a clear day, talking themselves step by step into oblivion, their final moments captured in a chilling, real-time radio play of confusion and gathering dread. The confusion of a lost squadron fades into the bright, clear terror of a single summer afternoon. In Australia, the year 1966 began with a sense of optimistic warmth. On Australia Day, January 26th, in the coastal city of Adelaide, the Beaumont children asked their parents for permission to take the bus to the nearby Glenelg Beach. It was a trip they had made before, a short ride from their suburban home. Jane was 9, Arna was 7, and their brother Grant was just 4. Their mother, Nancy Beaumont, packed them a lunch, gave them some change for the bus fare, and expected them home on the 3 o'clock bus. When that bus came and went without them, a quiet worry began to stir. By 5 o'clock, it had curdled into full-blown panic. Nancy and her husband Jim called the police. Their 3 children had vanished without a trace from a crowded beach on a brilliant summer day. What followed was an investigative maze built on fleeting glimpses and heartbreaking dead ends. Witnesses reported seeing the 3 children playing on the sand with a tall, slim, blonde-haired man in his 30s, dressed in blue swimming trunks. He appeared friendly, joining in their games. Later, the same man was seen with the children walking away from the beach, seemingly at ease. Jane, a responsible girl, was seen buying pastries and a meat pie with a 1-pound note, a large denomination for a child to have. This suggested the man had given her money, building a terrifying rapport. The bus conductor recalled the children boarding for the return trip, but they were alone. They got off at their usual stop, seemingly headed home, and then they simply ceased to exist. The police launched the largest manhunt in Australian history up to that time. Hundreds of officers combed the beach, dredged waterways, and followed thousands of leads. The case dominated national headlines, creating a collective anguish. For the first time, the idea that children could be stolen in broad daylight, from a public place, entered the national consciousness. The age of letting children roam freely was over. A profound and permanent shift in Australian parenting norms born from a single, devastating event. The investigation would be haunted by a parade of suspects, but never by conclusive proof. The file grew thick with the names of known sex offenders and persons of interest. One of the most notorious was a man named Bevan Spencer von Einem, later convicted for a similar, horrific crime in the 1980s. He was a strong suspect, but police could never directly link him to the Beaumonts. Another figure was a mysterious businessman from Melbourne, whose own family suspected him, but he died without any charges being laid. In the 1990s, a psychic's vision prompted a major excavation at a factory site near the beach, drawing national media frenzy, but nothing was found. The lack of physical evidence of any bodies or crime scene was the investigation's cruel anchor. Without it, every theory remained just that, a theory. The parents, Nancy and Jim, endured a special kind of hell, their hopes slowly eroded by decades of false leads and cruel hoaxes. They eventually divorced under the strain, their family fractured by an absence that was a constant, crushing presence. The disappearance of the Beaumont children is more than a cold case, it is a national wound. It represents the moment a country lost its innocence, when the safe, sun-drenched image of Australian childhood was shadowed by an unthinkable threat. The case remains open, a testament to a family's shattered life and a community's enduring question. Who was the tall, blonde man on the beach, and where, on that perfect summer day, did he take those three bright, trusting children? The bright terror of a stolen afternoon gives way to a different kind of vanishing, one born not from human malice, but from the Earth's own secrets and the greed it can inspire. In the arid, jagged heart of Arizona, the Superstition Mountains hold a legend that has lured men to their doom for over a century. This is the story of the Lost Dutchman's gold mine. It begins with a German immigrant named Jacob Waltz. In the late 1800s, Waltz, often called the Dutchman due to a linguistic mix-up, began showing up in Phoenix with extraordinary amounts of raw, high-quality gold. He would buy supplies, have a drink, and then vanish back into the brutal mountain wilderness for months. He claimed to have found a mother lode, a vein so rich you could pull gold nuggets straight from the wall. But he was fiercely secretive, guarding its location with his life. The legend truly crystallized on his deathbed in 1891. Feverish and dying, he is said to have given cryptic, poetic clues to a caretaker. He spoke of a mine you could see from a certain trail only at a specific time of day, when the shadow of a nearby rock formation pointed directly to the entrance. He mentioned a needle-like rock, a three-tiered landmark, and a canyon you could ride right past without ever seeing the treasure at your feet. With his last breath, he supposedly whispered that to find it, you had to stand where his shadow fell at a particular hour. And then he was gone, taking the precise coordinates with him. Those dying words were a siren song. They launched a treasure hunt that has never ceased. Prospectors, adventurers, and dreamers have poured into the superstitions, maps in hand, convinced they could crack the Dutchman's code. The terrain itself is a natural fortress, a maze of sheer cliffs, deep canyons, and temperatures that swing from scorching to freezing. But the mountains have proven to be more than just inhospitable. They have been deadly. The list of those who have vanished or died searching for the mine is long and grim. In 1903, 2 soldiers on leave went looking and were found shot to death, their camp ransacked. In 1947, a prospector named James Cravey set out and simply never returned, his disappearance adding to the lore. Perhaps the most famous tragedy is that of Adolf Ruth, who in 1931 ventured into the mountains with what he claimed was a genuine map from Walt's own family. Searchers found his camp weeks later, abandoned. His skull was discovered months after that, a bullet hole in it, some distance away. His notebooks were found at the camp, and the final chilling entry read, Veni, Vidi, Vici. I came, I saw, I conquered. But what exactly had he seen? These are not isolated incidents. Dozens have died from exposure, falls, or unexplained violence, their stories weaving a modern mythology of a curse that protects the gold. So what is the truth behind the mountain's bloody reputation? There are 3 compelling possibilities. First, that the entire story is a magnificent fabrication, a tall tale spun by a lonely prospector that grew in the telling. Waltz may have simply been a very good placer miner, finding gold in streams and letting others imagine a secret source. Second, the mine might have been real, but simply played out, a small, rich vein that Waltz exhausted himself, leaving behind a story to secure his legacy. The third possibility is the most tantalizing and the most dangerous, that the Lost Dutchman mine is real, and still out there. Geologically, the superstitions are part of an ancient volcanic field, and such areas can indeed harbor rich gold deposits. The Peralta family from Mexico were known to mine in the region decades before Waltz, and many believe the Dutchman stumbled upon one of their lost workings. This theory suggests the gold is there, but the mountain guards it jealously, its confusing topography and extreme conditions serving as a perfect, natural trap. Whether a physical place or a psychological one, the mine's greatest yield has never been gold, but tragedy. It represents the ultimate treasure hunt, where the map is written in rumor and blood, and the X does not mark a spot, but a grave. The mountain keeps its secret, and with every new disappearance, the legend only grows richer. While mountains guard their treasure in sun-baked rock, the sea conceals its losses in a far deeper vault. Just a few years after the eerie mystery of the Mary Celeste, another ship vanished under circumstances that seemed to defy all odds, this time with over 200 souls on board. In July 1909, the SS Waretta, a modern and luxurious passenger liner often called the Australian Titanic, set sail from Durban, South Africa, bound for Cape Town. It was a routine coastal voyage along what sailors knew as the Wild Coast, a stretch of water notorious for its unpredictable and ferocious weather. The Waretta was a substantial vessel, 465 feet long, and carried 211 people, a mix of passengers and crew. But even before this fateful journey, the ship had garnered a reputation. Several passengers on previous voyages had complained of a pronounced and unsettling roll, a sluggishness in righting itself after leaning into a wave. Some whispered it was top-heavy, its design perhaps flawed, with too much weight too high above the waterline. A naval architect traveling on an earlier trip had reportedly expressed serious concerns about its stability in a letter to his wife, writing that he would not be surprised if the ship turned turtle, meaning capsized, in a severe storm. On the night of July 27th, the Waretta was spotted for the last time. Another steamer, the Clan McIntyre, encountered her in the growing darkness and heavy seas off the coast of Transkei. The captain of the Clan McIntyre noted the Waretta was laboring, fighting the waves, but was nonetheless under power and on course. As night fell completely, the Waretta's lights receded into the stormy blackness. By morning, she was gone. When the ship failed to arrive in Cape Town, alarm bells rang. A massive search was launched, one of the most extensive maritime searches of its time. Ships scoured the wild coast, looking for any sign of wreckage, lifeboats, or floating debris. They found nothing, not a single lifebelt, not a piece of furniture, not a shred of clothing. The Waretta, a 5,000-ton steel ocean liner, had disappeared as completely as a pebble dropped into a pond. The utter lack of evidence became the central, terrifying puzzle. The leading theory points directly to the ship's suspected instability. In the heart of a violent storm off the wild coast, a region known for freakishly large waves and powerful currents, the Waretta may have encountered a single, catastrophic event. One possibility is a structural failure. A huge wave could have smashed into the side of the ship, causing a critical breach or shifting its already precarious cargo of lead concentrate and machinery, leading to a sudden, irreversible list. Once past a certain angle, the water would have rushed into open portholes or broken hatches, pulling the ship under in minutes, too quickly for any distress signals or for lifeboats to be launched. The other, even more dramatic theory involves a rogue wave. Sailors have long told stories of these monstrous, solitary walls of water that rise up seemingly from nowhere, reaching heights of 80 or even 100 feet. Science now confirms they are real. A single, perfect rogue wave striking the Waretta at a broadside could have rolled the ship over completely before anyone could react, the immense weight of its superstructure dragging it straight to the seabed. This would explain the total absence of wreckage on the surface. Everything would have been trapped inside as the ship plunged downward. The seabed in that area is a complex, deep canyon system, a jagged underwater landscape where a wreck could remain hidden for centuries. Despite modern expeditions with side-scan sonar, the final resting place of the SS Waretta remains one of the ocean's most stubborn secrets. Its story is a haunting reminder that even in the age of steam and steel, the sea holds a power that can erase a vast, modern machine and every life within it, leaving behind only the echo of a last sighting in a stormy night and a mystery as deep and dark as the water itself. The sea's ability to swallow a great ship whole is mirrored by a train's capacity to make a single man vanish into thin air. At the dawn of the age of moving images, one inventor stood on the brink of immortality. His name was Louis Le Prince, a French-born artist and engineer working in England. By 1890, he had achieved what many thought impossible. He had built and patented a single-lens motion picture camera, and he had used it to create the world's first true films, short sequences of people walking in a garden and traffic crossing a bridge. These were not just experiments, they were the birth of cinema. Le Prince was preparing for a triumphant trip to America, where he would publicly demonstrate his invention, secure his fame, and likely be crowned the father of motion pictures. Then, in September of that year, he took a brief, personal trip to France to visit his brother in Dijon. On September 16th, he said goodbye to friends, boarded an afternoon train from Dijon back to Paris, and was never seen again. When the train pulled into the Paris station, Le Prince was not on it. His checked luggage, which contained his precious patent papers and the plans for his latest camera, was also missing from the baggage car. A massive search of the railway line found nothing. No body, no personal effects, no sign of a struggle. It was as if he had dissolved somewhere along that 150-mile stretch of track. The timing of his disappearance is what layers the mystery with suspicion and dark possibility. He vanished just days before he was scheduled to sail to New York for his landmark demonstration. Had he arrived, the history of cinema might have begun with the name Le Prince, not Thomas Edison. This proximity to world-changing success fuels theories of foul play. One persistent idea is industrial espionage turned deadly. Edison, already working on his own motion picture devices, is often cast as the shadowy villain in this narrative. Could agents acting for a rival have intercepted Le Prince, stolen his documents, and made him disappear to secure a commercial monopoly? There is no evidence linking Edison to the event, but the motive seems compelling in retrospect. Other possibilities are more personal. Some suggested Le Prince, burdened by debt and pressure, might have staged his own disappearance or even taken his own life. Yet his demeanor before the trip was reportedly upbeat and excited about his future. Then there is a strange, familial twist. Years later, Le Prince's own son, who was assisting him, testified in a patent lawsuit that he believed his aunt, Le Prince's wife, and her family had conspired to have him killed over a dispute about money and the invention's ownership. This theory of a family cover-up is as shocking as it is unproven. Without a body or any forensic evidence, every theory remains a ghost story. Louis Le Prince's legacy is a profound what-if. His pioneering work was real, but his person was erased at the very moment he was to step into the light. The train from Dijon became a time machine that carried him out of history, leaving us to wonder if the first true filmmaker was also cinema's first and most tragic victim. A man who captured motion, but was himself caught in a still frame of eternal mystery. Le Prince vanished on the cusp of revealing a new world of images, but some vanishings are so complete they erase an entire world itself. In the winter of 373 B.C., the powerful Greek city-state of Helike met such a fate. For centuries, Helike had been a major maritime and religious center, the leader of a league of city-states and the site of a revered temple to Poseidon, god of the sea and earthquakes. Then, in a single terrifying night, it was gone. Ancient historians like Strabo and Diodorus Siculus recorded the catastrophe. First, for 5 days, animals fled the city, a classic omen of impending disaster. Then, massive columns of flame were seen in the sky. Finally, a colossal earthquake struck, shaking the land so violently that the entire city collapsed. As the ground buckled, the sea rushed in. A towering tsunami swept over the ruins, dragging every building, every statue, every citizen into the abyss. By morning, where a thriving metropolis had stood, there was only water. The city of Poseidon had been utterly consumed by the god's own domain. The story of Helike quickly passed into legend, a moral lesson about divine punishment, though the specifics were forgotten. For over 2,000 years, the lost city was a ghost in the historical record, its exact location a mystery, often sought but never found. Many assumed it lay deep beneath the waters of the Corinthian Gulf. Then, in the 1990s, a pair of archaeologists made a breakthrough. Instead of searching the seafloor, they looked inland, guided by ancient texts that described the area later becoming an inland lagoon. Using ground-penetrating radar and core drilling in a flat, agricultural plain, they made an astounding discovery. Buried under nearly 20 feet of silt and clay, they found the remains of Helike. They uncovered building foundations, pottery, coins, and even a possible roadside shrine, all preserved in a thick layer of lagoon mud that had sealed the city like a time capsule. The evidence confirmed the ancient accounts with chilling precision. The earthquake had caused a phenomenon called soil liquefaction, where solid ground temporarily turns to quicksand, swallowing structures whole. Then, the tsunami deposited a layer of marine shells and sea sand over the wreckage. Finally, over the centuries, river sediments filled the sunken area, creating the flat plain that hid the secret. Hylike was not at the bottom of the sea, but entombed beneath a farmer's field. This real-world discovery makes Hylike profoundly important. It serves as a tangible, archaeological parallel to the myth of Atlantis. Here was a sophisticated, powerful city, a leader of its age, obliterated in one night by a combined earthquake and tsunami. The event was so traumatic, so complete, that it echoed through the centuries as a story of a civilization punished by the gods and swallowed by the sea. Hylike proves that such cataclysms are not mere fantasy, they are geological facts. It shows how a real disaster can, over generations of retelling, transform into a timeless legend, a warning from the deep past about the fragile line between human achievement and the raw, tectonic power of the earth. The earth can swallow a city, but the sea demands its sacrifices one person at a time. On a hot December afternoon in 1967, Australia's Prime Minister, Harold Holt, decided to go for a swim. This was not unusual. Holt was 59, fit, and a famously strong, confident swimmer who loved the ocean. The beach was Cheviot, a rugged, isolated spot near Melbourne known for its dangerous rips and powerful surf. That day, the conditions were rough, the waves crashing with a menacing force that deterred most sensible people. Holt, however, seemed undaunted. He waded into the churning water with friends watching from the sand. Moments later, a large set of waves rolled in. When the foam cleared, Harold Holt was gone. He had simply vanished beneath the surface, swept away in an instant. The immediate search was one of the largest in Australian peacetime history. Navy divers, helicopters, and hundreds of personnel scoured the coastline and treacherous waters for days. They found nothing, not his body, not a shred of his swimming trunks. The official inquest concluded he had drowned, a tragic accident, but the complete absence of a body, combined with Holt's position as the nation's leader, made the public mind churn with darker possibilities. Conspiracy theories bloomed like toxic algae. Holt was a staunch supporter of the Vietnam War and had recently deepened Australia's military alliance with the United States. Could he have been assassinated by enemy agents? Some whispered he had staged his own death, perhaps to defect or escape political pressure. An outlandish idea given his very public profile. The most bizarre theory, fueled by Cold War paranoia, suggested he had been plucked from the water by a Chinese submarine waiting offshore. There was even a cruel rumor of suicide, though those who knew him dismissed it utterly. He was in good spirits, excited for the holidays, and planning his upcoming wedding. The truth was likely as brutally simple as the ocean itself. Even the strongest swimmer is no match for a sudden, overwhelming rip current. Holt may have been caught in one, pulled out to sea and under before he could even call for help. Yet the political shockwaves of his disappearance were very real. The event exposed glaring gaps in the protection of high-ranking officials. In direct response, the Australian government established a dedicated protective security branch within its intelligence agency, ASIO, to ensure such a vulnerable, public vanishing could never happen again. Harold Holt's legacy is therefore a double one. He is remembered both as a prime minister who vanished into a mystery, and as the reason why those who lead are now watched so closely. A final, unintended consequence of one man's confidence against the indifferent power of the sea. The ocean's indifference is mirrored by the desert's slow, unforgiving patience. High on the sun-baked cliffs of the American Southwest, another civilization left behind a mystery not of a single moment, but of a slow, deliberate fade to silence. These are the magnificent cliff dwellings of Mesa Verde and the great houses of Chaco Canyon, built by a people archaeologists call the ancestral Pueblones, though you might know them by the older name, the Anasazi. By the late 13th century, these astonishing stone cities, carved into canyon walls and rising from the desert floor, were completely empty. The people did not vanish from the earth, but their entire world, their society in that region, simply collapsed. Walking through these silent, multi-story apartments today, you are struck not by signs of disaster, but by an eerie sense of orderly departure. Rooms were cleaned out. Doorways were sealed. It feels less like a flight and more like a closing. So what could make an entire culture abandon architectural marvels they had labored for generations to build? The archaeological record holds clear clues, and they point away from a sudden, violent end. There is no evidence of a massive invasion, no layers of ash from burning, no unburied bodies suggesting warfare or massacre. Instead, the story told by tree rings and soil samples is one of a slow, crushing environmental crisis. The region was hit by a prolonged and severe drought, one that lasted not for years, but for decades. This was not merely a dry spell. It was a climatic shift that pushed a finely balanced system past its breaking point. The ancestral Puebloans were masterful dryland farmers, but even their ingenuity could not make rain fall. As the springs dried up and the crops failed year after year, famine would have become a constant shadow, but the drought may have been only the final blow. There is compelling evidence that the people themselves had strained their environment to its limit. To build the great houses of Chaco Canyon, they needed vast amounts of timber for roofs and upper stories. They cut down forests of ponderosa pine from mountains dozens of miles away, hauling the logs by hand. This widespread deforestation likely led to soil erosion, washing away the very topsoil needed for agriculture and altering local water cycles. They had, in a sense, built their own magnificent trap. A society facing such relentless pressure would have fractured from within. Social and religious structures built for times of plenty would have crumbled under the strain of scarcity. Perhaps leaders lost their authority. Perhaps conflicts arose over dwindling resources. The result was not extinction, but a profound migration. Over generations, families and clans likely made a difficult decision. They left their towering stone homes and began to walk, joining other Pueblo groups living along the Rio Grande and its tributaries, where water was more reliable. Their culture did not die, it transformed and moved. The descendants of these master builders are the Pueblo peoples of today, like the Hopi and the communities of New Mexico, who carry forward their ancestors' rich traditions, pottery, and spiritual knowledge. The disappearance of the ancestral Puebloans from their cliffside cities is therefore a different kind of mystery. It is not a vanishing act, but a story of resilience and adaptation. It shows us that sometimes a civilization's greatest achievement is not the monument it leaves behind, but the difficult choice to walk away from it, to ensure the people themselves survive. The ancestral Puebloans walked away from their homes, but in the winter of 1959, 9 experienced hikers were forced to flee theirs in the middle of the night. The Dyatlov Pass incident is a mystery that begins with a single, frantic act of escape. A group of skilled Soviet university students, led by Igor Dyatlov, embarked on a challenging ski trek through the northern Ural Mountains. They were all in peak physical condition, well-equipped, and familiar with the brutal winter conditions, but they never reached their destination. When they failed to send a prearranged telegram, a search party was sent. What they found on the slopes of Khalat Siek, which translates to Dead Mountain, was a scene of profound and inexplicable terror. The group's tent was discovered still standing, but it had been cut open from the inside with a knife, as if someone had slashed their way out in a desperate hurry. Footprints led away from the tent, heading downhill toward a dense forest. The tracks showed the hikers were barefoot, or wearing only socks and light clothing, despite the temperature being far below zero. They had fled into a killing freeze without their boots or coats. The bodies were found over the next several months, scattered in different locations. The first 5 were discovered near a cedar tree, having died from hypothermia. Farther into the woods, the remaining 4 were found with traumatic and bizarre injuries. One woman was missing her tongue. 2 men had massive internal chest trauma, broken ribs and crushed hearts, but with no corresponding external wounds on their bodies, as if they had been crushed by an immense, invisible force. 1 man had a fractured skull. Their clothing also showed traces of high levels of radiation. The official Soviet investigation, after a perfunctory look, closed the case with a maddeningly vague conclusion, stating the hikers had met their deaths due to a compelling natural force. The files were sealed, and the mystery was left to fester in the public imagination for decades. Modern re-examinations have proposed more grounded, though still frightening, explanations. The leading theory involves a rare slab avalanche, A heavy layer of snow could have slid onto the tent in the dead of night, not burying it completely, but creating a suffocating, crushing pressure. This would explain why they cut their way out in panic and fled, fearing another slide. The internal injuries could have been caused by the avalanche's impact, a dense block of snow hitting with the force of concrete. Hypothermia and confusion would have done the rest, leading the group to scatter and succumb. Other theories explore strange natural phenomena. Some scientists suggest infrasound, low-frequency sound waves produced by wind passing over specific mountain ridges, which can induce feelings of intense dread, panic, and even physical illness in humans. Could a sudden, overwhelming wave of terror have driven them from their shelter? Then there are the more exotic possibilities. The area was known for secret military testing. Could they have stumbled upon a test of a parachute mine or other explosive device, explaining the internal injuries and radiation? Or were they victims of a hostile encounter with indigenous Mansi tribesmen, though no evidence of a struggle supported this? The Dyatlov Pass case endures because every plausible explanation leaves a thread dangling. An avalanche doesn't explain the radiation. Infrasound doesn't account for the specific, brutal injuries. The sheer, multi-layered strangeness of the scene, from the cut tent to the missing tongue, creates a puzzle where the pieces never quite fit. It is a snapshot of a single, frozen moment of absolute, collective panic. A moment that 9 seasoned outdoorsmen chose almost certain death by freezing over whatever they were fleeing inside that tent. Their story is a true life horror film set on a mountain slope, a reminder that sometimes the most compelling natural force is fear itself. Fear itself can drive people into a frozen wilderness, but the open ocean requires no such emotion to claim its victims. The single largest loss of life in United States naval history not related to combat occurred with a silence as deep as the sea. In March 1918, the USS Cyclops, a massive 540-foot-long collier ship, was tasked with a vital wartime mission, carrying a crucial cargo of manganese ore from Brazil to the steel mills of Baltimore. With 309 souls aboard, including crew and passengers, she made a routine stop in Barbados for supplies. On March 4th, she sent a final, mundane radio message reporting fair weather and smooth seas. Then, the USS Cyclops, her 309 lives, and her 10,000 tons of metal simply ceased to exist. She never arrived in Baltimore. She never sent a distress call. She left no trace whatsoever. The Navy launched an immense search, scouring the stretch of ocean between Barbados and the Chesapeake Bay, an area that would later become infamous as part of the Bermuda Triangle. They found nothing. No lifeboats, no floating debris, no oil slick, not a single piece of wreckage. A ship the length of nearly 2 football fields had vanished as completely as a sigh in the wind. The mystery was compounded by the Cyclops' known flaws. She was a collier, a workhorse designed to carry coal, not dense manganese ore. There were reports she was dangerously overloaded for this voyage, her hull straining under the weight. More troubling were her structural issues. The Cyclops had a unique and problematic design feature, a single long crane that ran along her centerline for loading cargo. This design potentially created a critical weakness in her hull's longitudinal strength. Some sailors who had served on her called her a floating coffin, noting she would bend and twist alarmingly in heavy seas. These facts point toward a sudden, catastrophic structural failure. One prevailing theory is that the overloaded hull, already stressed from years of service, finally succumbed to a powerful storm or even just a large, rogue wave. The manganese ore, a heavy, shifting cargo, could have suddenly slid to one side if the ship listed. In a matter of minutes, this could have caused the Cyclops to capsize and plunge straight to the ocean floor, giving no one time to radio for help. The sheer weight and density of the ore would have dragged her down like a stone, leaving little to float to the surface. In the context of World War I, other suspicions arose. Could a German U-boat have intercepted and sunk her? Yet no U-boat commander ever claimed the credit for such a significant kill, and no submarine activity was reported in the area at that time. The idea of enemy sabotage or an internal explosion was also investigated, but again, not a shred of evidence was found to support it. The sea gave up no secrets. The loss of the Cyclops is so haunting because of its totality. It represents a perfect vanishing, where a known variable, a flawed and overloaded ship, met the immense, unknown variable of the deep Atlantic. The ocean did not just sink a vessel, it erased all evidence that she was ever there, leaving behind only a logbook entry, a final weather report, and a question mark that hangs over the fate of 309 men. It is a reminder that the sea's greatest power is not in its storms, but in its silence. That single word, Croatoan, carved into the post, was more than a clue. It was a deliberate sign, a message left for John White, pointing toward a specific hope. Croatoan was the name of a nearby island, today's Hatteras Island, and more importantly, the name of the Native American people who lived there. These were the Croatan, ancestors of the modern Lumbee tribe, and they had a documented history of friendly relations with the English. This single word fuels the most compelling theory of all, that the colonists did not die out, but chose to survive by joining the Croatan community. Facing starvation and abandonment, splitting into smaller groups and integrating with a friendly, established society would have been a logical, if desperate, strategy for survival. Later accounts from other English explorers lend this idea weight. In the early 1600s, reports surfaced of Native Americans in the Carolina interior who had gray eyes, spoke English, lived in European-style houses, and even used English-style fencing. One man, claimed to be the son of a lost colonist, was said to wear a piece of iron armor. These stories suggest a slow, generational blending, where the Roanoke colonists became part of a new, hybrid community. But the desire for a more dramatic, written ending proved irresistible. In the 1930s, during the Great Depression, a series of engraved stones known as the Dare Stones surfaced. Purportedly written by Eleanor White Dare, the mother of Virginia Dare, they told a harrowing tale of Native American attacks, travel inland, and her eventual death. For a time, they created a sensation. However, closer examination revealed them to be elaborate hoaxes. The engraving style was wrong, the language contained anachronisms, and the stone's provenance was suspicious. Most historians and archaeologists dismiss them entirely. A cautionary tale about how desperately we want this mystery to have a neat, tragic conclusion. The real search has moved from sensational artifacts to meticulous science. Today, archaeologists are using tools the 16th century could never imagine. They conduct soil core sampling at sites on Hatteras Island and mainland North Carolina, looking for microscopic evidence of Elizabethan activity, like pollen from European plants or distinct layers of ash from English-style fires. The most promising frontier is genetic. Researchers are engaged in a long-term project to collect and analyze DNA from present-day descendants of the southeastern tribes, like the Lumbee, searching for rare European genetic markers that could be traced back to the late 1500s. Finding such a link would be the closest thing to a smoking gun, biological proof of assimilation. This 400-year-old cold case is therefore uniquely alive. It is no longer just about what happened in 1587, but about how stories and people endure. The search for the lost colony has evolved from a hunt for graves to a quest for living connections, a scientific effort to confirm that in the face of oblivion, the human instinct is not always to vanish, but sometimes to become part of something new, leaving a trace not in carved wood, but in the very bloodlines of a people. The story of the Franklin expedition does not end with two empty ships locked in the ice. It continues on the bleak, frozen shore of King William Island, where the final, desperate chapter of 129 men was written in suffering and silence. For years, the only accounts of their fate came from the Inuit, passed down through generations. They spoke of seeing small groups of gaunt, ghost-like men dragging heavy wooden boats across the ice, their movements slow and labored. They told of finding camps where the dead lay beside the remains of their companions, and of bones that had been clearly cut and broken open. For a long time, these oral histories, with their grim suggestions, were dismissed or ignored by European searchers. But modern archaeology has proven them to be heartbreakingly accurate. On the windswept beaches of King William Island, researchers have uncovered human bones bearing unmistakable cut marks, precise and deliberate slices made by metal blades. The forensic analysis is chillingly clear. These marks are not from weapons or animal scavenging. They are the signs of systematic butchering, of bodies being dismembered. This is the starkest evidence of the crew's final resort, cannibalism, undertaken in a last, futile struggle against starvation. But starvation alone does not explain the totality of the disaster. Why did these experienced sailors, with ships full of supplies, make such catastrophic choices? The answer may lie in the very technology meant to save them, their tinned food. In the 19th century, cans were sealed with lead solder. Scientists examining the bones of Franklin's men have found staggeringly high levels of lead, up to 10 times normal levels. Lead poisoning is a slow, insidious killer. It causes severe abdominal pain, profound fatigue, and crippling mental confusion. It clouds judgment and saps the will. Imagine the horror, trapped in endless twilight, the cold seeping into your bones, your mind growing foggy and unreliable, your body racked with pain from the very food you eat to survive. This was the invisible enemy aboard the Erebus and Terror. The men were not just cold and hungry. They were being poisoned, their ability to plan, to lead, to hope, chemically eroded day by day. The psychological toll of that multi-year imprisonment is almost beyond comprehension. 2 summers came and went without the ice releasing its grip. The constant darkness of the winters, the groaning pressure of the ice against the hulls, the dwindling hope with each passing day, it would have broken the strongest spirit. When they finally abandoned the ships in a mass exodus to walk south, they were already ghosts of themselves, poisoned, scurvy-ridden, and utterly defeated by a landscape that offered no mercy. For over a century, this was the only story we knew, a tragedy pieced together from bones and whispers. Then, the ice gave up its greatest secrets. In 2014, the remarkably preserved wreck of HMS Erebus was found sitting upright on the seafloor. 2 years later, HMS Terror was discovered in equally stunning condition, her mast still standing, windows intact, as if waiting for her crew to return. These time capsules are slowly rewriting the narrative. Divers have recovered artifacts that speak of everyday life frozen in a moment, plates, a lieutenant's epaulettes, even jars of preserved food. Each carefully documented find peels back a layer of the mystery, not to provide a simple ending, but to deepen our understanding of the sheer scale of the catastrophe. The Franklin expedition's disappearance was not a single event, but a slow, grinding collapse of technology, health, and human spirit against an environment that was utterly indifferent to their dreams of glory. Theirs is a story written in lead, in bone, and in the perfect, preserved silence of 2 ships that never made it home. But the vastness of the Pacific holds more than just deep water. It holds islands, and one of them may hold the key. The most compelling alternative to a simple crash and sinking is the Nikimaroro hypothesis. This theory centers on a tiny, uninhabited coral atoll called Gardner Island, now known by its Kiribati name, Nikimaroro, located roughly 350 miles southeast of Howland Island. The story begins not with a modern expedition, but with a discovery made just 3 years after Earhart vanished. In 1940, a British colonial officer named Gerald Gallagher arrived on Nikimaroro to explore its potential for settlement. What his team found was startling. On the island's southeast reef, they discovered a partial human skeleton. The bones were found with a woman's shoe, a sextant box of a type used by the U.S. Navy in the 1930s, and the remains of a fire with bird and turtle bones nearby, suggesting someone had survived there for a time. Gallagher sent the bones to Fiji for analysis. A doctor there measured them and concluded they belonged to a robust, middle-aged male of European or mixed descent. Based on this, the bones were filed away and later lost, and the world moved on. But the story of Nikimaroro was far from over. Decades later, a dedicated organization called the International Group for Historic Aircraft Recovery, or TIGHAR, took up the case. They re-examined Gallagher's original reports and made a crucial discovery. Using modern forensic techniques, they analyzed the original bone measurements. The doctor in 1940 had used an outdated method to determine sex. When TIGHAR experts applied contemporary standards, they found the skeleton's dimensions, particularly the ratio of the arm bones, were actually more consistent with a tall woman of Northern European descent, a profile that matched Amelia Earhart almost perfectly. This revelation transformed Nikimaroro from a footnote into a primary crime scene. Tighar has since launched over a dozen expeditions to the atoll, a grueling endeavor in one of the most remote places on Earth. Their work has unearthed a tantalizing collection of artifacts. They found fragments of aluminum sheet metal on the reef edge, which metallurgical analysis shows is consistent with the type and thickness of the skin from a Lockheed Electra. They discovered a piece of clear plexiglass with the same curvature as an Electra's side window. On the island itself, they located what appear to be the remnants of small, survivalist campfires, containing fish and bird bones, and even fragments of a bottle that once held a herbal product used to freckle cream, a product Amelia was known to use. Their theory paints a vivid and tragic picture. Lost, low on fuel, and unable to find Howland, Earhart, and Noonan spotted the flat reef of Nikimaroro. They managed to put the plane down on the reef at low tide, a controlled crash landing that left the aircraft damaged but intact. For a time, perhaps weeks or even months, they survived as castaways. They would have collected rainwater, caught fish and birds, and lit signal fires. The plane, eventually battered by high tides, broke apart, scattering debris across the reef. The skeleton found in 1940, according to this scenario, was likely that of Earhart herself, who ultimately succumbed to injury, infection, or starvation. Fred Noonan's fate remains unknown, his remains perhaps claimed by the ocean or the dense undergrowth. This is not a story of a sudden, watery end, but of a prolonged, desperate fight for life on a sliver of land in an endless blue desert. It is a narrative that transforms a disappearance into a survival epic, and makes the silent, palm-fringed shores of Nikimaroro one of the most haunting potential graves in the history of exploration. Yet for decades, the avalanche theory faced a major, seemingly insurmountable problem. The slope where the hikers pitched their tent was not steep, not by the standards that typically trigger such disasters. It was a gentle incline, far from the dramatic mountain faces where snowslides are common. This single fact allowed more exotic theories to flourish because a conventional avalanche seemed, on its surface, impossible. Then, in 2021, a team of scientists and engineers published a study that changed the entire conversation. Using advanced computer modeling and modern snow physics, they revisited that frozen mountainside with fresh eyes. Their conclusion was startling. A rare and specific type of avalanche, a slab avalanche, could indeed have occurred on that mild slope, given the exact conditions present that night. The key lay in the layers of snow. The researchers proposed that an old, dense layer of snow lay beneath a newer, looser layer. The hikers, in digging out a platform for their tent on the hillside, had inadvertently cut into and weakened this lower slab, essentially undermining the stability of the snowpack above them. Then, the final trigger, a phenomenon known as katabatic winds. These are powerful, gravity-driven winds that roar down mountain slopes, and weather data suggests they were active that evening. The combination was deadly. The wind deposited additional snow with tremendous force onto the already compromised slab. In the dead of night, a section of snow, perhaps not a massive wave but a dense, heavy block, could have silently released and slid onto the tent. This would not have been a Hollywood-style burial, but a sudden, crushing impact. Imagine waking in pitch darkness to the terrifying sound of fabric straining and poles buckling under immense, silent weight. The air is being pressed out of your shelter. In that moment of sheer, primal panic, your only thought is escape. You grab a knife and slash your way out, fleeing into the sub-zero darkness. You do not stop for boots or coats, because you believe the mountain itself is collapsing on top of you. This explains the cut tent and the barefoot prints in the snow. But what about those horrific internal injuries, the crushed chests with no external wounds? The new study offers a grimly plausible sequel. After the initial panic and flight, the group, now scattered and freezing, likely sought shelter. Some may have fallen into a natural ravine or snow den, a common feature in that terrain. A fall of even 10 or 15 feet onto hard, ice-covered rock or packed snow could generate tremendous force, enough to cause massive blunt trauma without leaving dramatic surface marks. Others, succumbing to severe hypothermia, might have exhibited paradoxical undressing, a known effect where the dying, confused and feeling a false sense of heat, remove their clothing. This scientific recreation provides the most coherent, evidence-based narrative we have. It ties together the physical evidence with the psychology of survival terror. Yet, for many, it still feels incomplete. It does not easily account for the traces of radiation on some clothing, or the specific, strange detail of the missing tongue, which could be the result of post-mortem animal scavenging in the months before the bodies were found. The human mind craves a story that explains every single eerie detail, and nature is often messier than that. The 2021 study does not claim to have solved the Dyatlov Pass incident, but it has powerfully shifted the burden of proof. It demonstrates that the most haunting elements of that night can emerge from a cascade of natural disasters. A terrible chain reaction that began with a cut in the snow and ended in a frozen, silent forest. Sometimes, the most compelling natural force is not a mystery at all, but a perfectly ordinary catastrophe, misunderstood for decades because its mechanics were hidden beneath the snow. These stories hold us in their grip because they are more than historical footnotes. They are profound confrontations with the unknown. A disappearance with no answer is a tear in the fabric of reality, a place where the orderly narrative of cause and effect simply stops. It forces us to stare into a void, and in that void, we see our own deepest fears reflected back at us. The fear of being forgotten, of leaving no trace, of a story cut off mid-sentence. This existential dread is powerful, but it is only the beginning of the allure. An unresolved mystery is a blank canvas for the human imagination. When the facts run out, we step in to fill the silence. The Lost Colony becomes a story of secret integration or alien abduction. The Mary Celeste transforms into a ghost ship, cursed by sea monsters or dimensional rifts. The Dyatlov Pass invites tales of secret weapons or Yeti attacks. These are not just silly fantasies, they are a psychological necessity. Our brains are wired for pattern recognition and narrative. We cannot tolerate the empty space, so we populate it with folklore, conspiracy theories, and myth. These stories evolve, becoming less about the original event and more about the anxieties of the eras that retell them. The Princes in the Tower were a Tudor propaganda tool. Amelia Earhart's fate became entangled with Cold War suspicions. Each generation paints its own fears and hopes onto the same mysterious outline. Yet this same discomfort, this same refusal to accept a blank page, is also what drives human progress. The frustration of not knowing is a powerful engine for discovery. The search for Franklin's ships led to monumental advances in Arctic exploration and marine archaeology. The quest to understand Roanoke pushes genetic science and forensic soil analysis to new limits. The hunt for Amelia Earhart has refined deep-sea sonar and robotic exploration. These mysteries force us to ask better questions and build better tools. They send us to the deepest ocean trenches, the highest mountain passes, and the most remote deserts, not just to find bones and wreckage, but to answer a more fundamental human question: what happened here? In the end, the greatest truth these disappearances reveal may not be about the vanished at all, but about those of us left behind, searching. They expose our relentless need for closure, for a story with a beginning, a middle, and an end. We crave the catharsis of an answer, even a tragic one, because it allows us to file the event away, to make sense of a senseless universe. But perhaps there is a strange beauty in the unsolvable case. A perfect mystery never truly ends. It remains alive, a conversation across centuries, a perpetual invitation to wonder, to investigate, and to imagine. It reminds us that history is not a sealed book, but an ongoing excavation, and that sometimes the most enduring legacy is not what was left behind, but the endless search for it. From the consuming silence of the desert to the crushing pressure of the deep sea, we have traveled across centuries of unanswered questions. We have stood on the shore of a vanished colony, peered into an empty lighthouse, and watched a squadron of planes talk itself into oblivion over a calm sea. The scope of these mysteries is breathtaking, spanning from the legendary fall of Atlantis and the lost Roman legion to the intimate, heartbreaking theft of 3 children from a sunlit beach. What unites them is not just an absence, but a profound confrontation with the limits of our understanding. In some cases, like the sunken city of Helike, The patient work of archaeology has pulled a truth from the mud, transforming myth into a verified historical tragedy. In others, like the Franklin expedition, modern science has given voice to the bones and the wrecks, revealing a slow-motion catastrophe of lead poisoning and despair. Yet for every mystery that comes into focus, a dozen more remain stubbornly opaque, their secrets locked in ice, sand, or deep water. The common thread weaving through all of them is a powerful trio of forces: human ambition pushing against the indifferent, overwhelming power of nature, with the fragile thread of memory stretched taut between them. These stories remind us that history is not a neat ledger of facts, but a landscape littered with silent places where the story simply stops. They challenge our need for closure and ignite our imagination, forcing us to wonder what really happened in that tent on the mountain, or in that second-floor bedroom on a Christmas Eve. So we leave you with this question: of all the vanishings we have explored, which one lingers in your mind the most? Is it the chilling normalcy of the Mary Celeste, the political shock of Harold Holt, or the enduring hope for the Beaumont children? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let the conversation continue. If you found this journey into the unknown compelling, subscribe for more deep dives into the shadows of history. Remember, the past is not just a record of what we have found, but an endless frontier of what we have yet to discover.